Britain hasn't had marriage rates this low since Queen Victoria sat on the throne. Married households just hit a record low in America. In every Western country, people in their 20s are getting together later, less, and with more hesitation than ever before. Modern romance is dying. The interesting question is why? And the answer ends up being way weirder than everyone's on their phones too much. Most takes on this go in one of two directions. Either dating apps ruined everything, or kids these days are lazy and entitled and don't know how to commit. Both of these are wrong in slightly different ways. It's the same as saying dinosaurs went extinct because they got too soft. Something much bigger happened, and we're trying to explain it by blaming the victims. Here's what we know. In 1970, in England and Wales, 62% of men were married by age 25. By 2023, that number was 2%. That is a whopping 97% collapse. For the first time in recorded history, male pensioners in the UK are now more likely to get married than men in their 20s, which is, on reflection, a sentence that should not be allowed to exist. In the US, the median age at first marriage was 22 for men in the 1950s. It's now over 30. Married households peaked at nearly 79% of American households in the 1940s. Today, they're at 47%. The institution that used to define adult life is now statistically a minority lifestyle. But it's not just marriage. Between 2000 and 2018, the share of American men aged 18 to 24 reporting no sexual activity in the past year went from 19% to 31%. For young women, it nearly doubled. 60% of men under 30 currently describe themselves as single. The dating apps that were supposed to fix all this, your holy grail on a Friday night with a glass of wine, yeah, they're collapsing. Sorry. Only about 10% of partnered American adults actually met their current partner online, even though more than half of people under 30 have used the apps. The apps are huge. They're just not very good at the one thing they're for. So something has shifted, not a vibe shift, a demographic, structural, civilization level shift. And to understand what, we have to talk about wetlands. You really didn't predict that coming, now did you? Here's a strange fact about wetland species. When a wetland disappears, the species that live there don't usually die because something attacked them. They die because the conditions they evolved for stop existing. The water table drops, the temperature shifts, the food web collapses, and one day someone walks past where a marsh used to be and notices the frogs are gone. Who killed the frogs? No one, actually. We just drained the swamp. Romance, it turns out, was a wetland species. For most of human history, finding a partner wasn't a project you took on. It was something that happened to you in a specific kind of environment that we have spent the last 60 years systematically dismantling. And like most ecological collapses, we didn't notice the habitat was gone until the species started disappearing. What was the habitat? Three things mostly. First, coercion. Religion told you to get married. Your family expected you to get married. Your community noticed if you didn't. None of this is a fun thing to point out, but it's true. For most of history, romance wasn't optional. The cost of opting out was social, economic, and sometimes literal exile. People paired up because they kind of had to. The fact that some of these relationships became loving was, historically speaking, a bonus feature. Second, necessity. Marriage, until embarrassingly recently, was an economic survival strategy. You needed someone to share rent with, raise kids with, and not die alone with. Women in particular often couldn't legally own property, open a bank account, or get a mortgage without a husband. The romance was real. The infrastructure underneath it was financial. And third, proximity. You met your partner the way humans had met partners for 10,000 years, from your immediate physical world. Friends introduced you. You met them at work, at church, at the bar across from your apartment. There's a sociologist named Michael Rosenfeld who tracked how American couples met from 1940 onward. For most of that period, through friends was the dominant category by a mile. And then around 2013, for the first time in human history, more couples started meeting through algorithms than through friends. Friends as a category have basically been in freefall since 1995, which is the same year Match.com launched, which is probably not a coincidence. But I'll let you get there yourself. So are you with me? Coercion went away, necessity went away, proximity went away, and at every step, this was a freedom we asked for. The pill in 1960, no-fault divorce in 1969, women's economic independence through the 1970s, the internet in 1995, the iPhone in 2007, dating apps in 2012. Each of these was a real liberation. Each one was, in its own way, progress. And cumulatively, we removed every external scaffold that romance used to rest on. What we replaced it with was, well, a market. A market is what you get when you take human connection, strip out the friend networks and community context, and reduce it to a list of profiles you can sort through on a screen. And the thing about markets is that they have very specific psychological effects. Effects we maybe should have predicted, but to be fair, we were busy. Effect 1, choice overload. There's a famous study from 2000 where researchers set up a jam tasting booth at a grocery store. With 6 jams, people tasted, decided, and bought. With 24 jams, more people came to look. But almost nobody bought anything. The brain, faced with too many options, simply stops choosing. Now imagine that experiment, except the jams are people, the jams never run out, and the jam in front of you is actively wondering if there's a slightly better jam 2 swipes away. Researchers studying online dating call this the rejection mindset. The longer you swipe, the more your brain trains itself to say no. Not because the people are getting worse, because you're getting worse at the only thing that matters, which is choosing. Effect 2, inequality. The dating apps don't distribute attention evenly, they concentrate it. On Tinder, the male Gini coefficient, which is what economists use to measure inequality of wealth, is 0.58, which is a fancy way of saying that on Tinder, the distribution of male attractiveness, as voted on by women, is more unequal than the distribution of income in 95% of countries on Earth. The top 10% of men get more than half the matches. The bottom 80% of men compete for the bottom 22% of women. Or, to put it another way, the dating market is more economically unequal than most actual economies that the UN considers crises. Effect 3, the slot machine. Dating apps are designed around something called variable ratio reinforcement, which is the same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. You don't know which swipe will get a match. You don't know which match will reply. And because the reward is unpredictable, your brain gets stuck in the loop. There's research showing that dopamine actually rises more when you're anticipating a match than when you actually get one, which means the apps aren't really designed to deliver romance. They're designed to deliver the feeling that romance is about to arrive. These platforms make money when you're swiping, not when you find love. If you find love, you leave. So they're optimized to keep you searching, which they do. The average user spends about 51 minutes a day on the app. That is roughly the length of a therapy session, which, given the data, is probably what you should be doing instead. So the apps aren't a villain in this story. They didn't cause the loneliness. They just charge rent on it. Now you might be thinking, okay, but plenty of people did meet their partners on apps and are happily together, and that's true. The problem isn't that nobody finds love anymore. The problem is what's happening to the bar for love. Because here's what nobody warned us about freedom. Once you remove the external pressure to settle down, the internal pressure rises. We used to ask our partners to be a co-parent and a co-tenant and someone whose family didn't make Christmas unbearable. That was basically the deal. Now we ask our partners to be all of that, plus our best friend, our therapist, our intellectual sparring partner, our adventure buddy, our co-founder, our personal trainer, and in our spare time, the love of our life. A psychologist named Eli Finkel has a name for this. He calls it the suffocation model of marriage. His argument is that we've taken an institution that used to be about basic survival and we've moved it up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all the way to the top, to self-actualization. We're asking marriage to deliver oxygen at altitudes it was never designed to operate at, and we're investing less time in our relationships than our parents did while expecting infinitely more from them. Which means 2 things at the same time are now true. The average marriage is getting worse, and the best marriages are getting better than the best marriages have ever been. Because if you can actually pull off the new altitude, the view is incredible. But most people can't. And so most people are quietly suffocating, while a small number of people are having the most fulfilling relationships in human history and posting about them on Instagram. So is romance dying? Maybe, but probably not in the way you think. Because here's the part that's actually unsettling, if you sit with me for a second. For the entire history of romance as a concept, we have never been able to measure what people would actually choose, because they didn't really have a choice. They had to pair up. The data was contaminated by coercion, necessity, and proximity. Now, for the first time, all three of those constraints have been lifted at once, and we are getting our first clean look at what humans, in aggregate, actually prefer when romance becomes optional. And it turns out a lot of people, given the choice, are choosing not this. Pew found that 57% of single American adults aren't even looking for a relationship right now. Not casually dating, not on the apps, not putting in the effort, just opting out. And once you understand the swamp got drained, this stops being shocking. Of course they're opting out. The work of romance used to be subsidized by the entire structure of society. Now you have to do all of it yourself, on hard mode, in an economy where you can't afford rent. The real story is that for the first time in human history, we get to see what humans actually want, when nobody is forcing them. And what we want, apparently, is something more complicated than find a person and stay with them forever. We didn't kill romance. We drained the swamp it lived in, and every drainage was a freedom we asked for. And now the bill is coming due. The question is what we want to do about it. Whether we try to rebuild some of the swamp, or whether we just live in the dry country we've made and find new ways to be alone. Most of us, I suspect, will choose the dry country.